Start. Wir starten mal von neu. So.
Dear Esther, the morning after I was washed ashore, salt in my ears, sand in my mouth, and the waves always at my ankles, I felt as though everything had conspired to this one last shipwreck. I remembered nothing but water, stones in my belly and my shoes, threatening to drag me under to where only the most listless of creatures swim.
Okay. Boah, das sieht aber... Irgendwo können wir nicht, okay? Farbspritzer. Boo. Warte. Was ist das für ein Buch? Okay. Kürbis. Food God. Das ist entweder ein Zifferkarte oder irgendwas mit 19. Ist auch wieder Farbe. History. Her History. Company? Aha, so kann ich nach ganz zoomen. Okay, dann gucken wir mal. Für oder zu. Auch mit Farbe bespritzt worden. Oh. Okay. Aha. Okay, komme ich denn? Kein Weg nach oben? Hoch konnte man nicht. Gibt's nicht? Okay, dann gehen wir mal raus. Gehen wir mal hier den Weg lang. Nach oben, rechts oder links? Ich gehe mal nach rechts. Erstmal. Bevor ich am Strand lang gehe. Aber den, guck mal, da ist schon ein neuer, anderer Leuchtturm zu sein. Wunderschön, ne?
Donnelly reported the legend of the hermit, a holy man who sought solitude in its most pure form. Allegedly, he rode here from the mainland in a boat without a bottom, so all the creatures of the sea could rise at night to converse with him. How disappointed he must have been with their chatter. Perhaps now, when all that haunts the ocean is the rubbish dumped from the tankers, he'd find more peace. They say he threw his arms wide in a valley on the south side, and the cliff opened up to provide him shelter. They say he died of fever 116 years later. The shepherds left gifts for him at the mouth of the cave, but Donnelly records they never claimed to have seen him. I have visited the cave and I have left my gifts, but like them, I appear to be an unworthy subject of his solitude.
Geschehen? Ich weiß nicht, ob es eine gute Idee ist. Hey, im Haus hast du Taschenlampe anmachen können. Wieso nicht hier? Ah, hier unten blinkt Licht. Gehen wir wieder raus. Kommen wir nicht weiter. Es ist so dunkel. So. Jetzt dürft ihr wieder was sehen können. Können wir hier weiter? Oh oh. Nee, irgendwie nicht. Sind wir am Strand. Und nach dem Weg da? Okay. Ich will wieder hoch. Ich muss da hoch. Hier. Alle? Mehr Körbe. Gibt's so.
There was once talk of a wind farm out here, away from the rage and the intolerance of the masses. The sea, they said, is too rough for the turbines to stand. They clearly never came here to experience the becalming for themselves. Personally, I would have supported it. Turbines would be a fitting contemporary refuge for a hermit. The revolution and the permanence.
Weit und breit Meer zu sehen.
A wonderful sight. The moon cresting the junction between the cliff path and the stone circle. It cast a shadow of the ridge across the beach, all the world as if you had signed your name in untidy handwriting.
Diese Gehwege so erinnern mich an Österreich, wo ich als kleines Kind mal war, so bei Bergen, wo dann so Wandertouren gegangen sind, Berge hoch, und da waren auch immer so kleine enge Wege und überall waren Büsche und ja, einmal durften wir uns nicht bewegen, weil da eine Natter war, die gefaucht hatte. War vermutlich eine Giftschlange, ne? Damals, wir mussten
When
still
someone
stehen
had
bleiben.
died or was dying, or was so ill they gave up what little hope they could sacrifice, they cut parallel lines into the cliff, exposing the white chalk beneath. You could see them from the mainland or the fishing boats, and know to send aid or impose a cordon of protection, and wait a generation until whatever pestilence stalked the cliff paths died along with its hosts. My lines are just for this. To keep any would-be rescuers at bay. The infection is not simply of the flesh,
Okay, irgendeine Krankheit herrschte hier. Da ist wohl der Wirt oder sowas gestorben. Vielleicht einer der Gründe, warum hier keiner mehr lebt und alles so... der Leuchtturm da vorne. Lebt doch noch jemand hier? Das ist die Frage. Da hinten leuchtet hier was. Leuchtturm. Lass uns jetzt mal hier weiter gehen. Das ist ja echt interessant. Das sieht echt unter die Blumen und... Vor allem haben wir Kinder erstmal beigebracht, ja, die darfst auf keinen Fall pflücken, steht unter Naturschutz. Ne? Ihr kennt ja, als kleines Kind geht man ja gerne.
They were God-fearing people, those shepherds. There was no love in the relationship. Donnelly tells me that they had one Bible that was passed around in strict rotation. It was stolen by a visiting monk in 1776, 2 years before the island was abandoned altogether. In the interim, I wonder, did they assign chapter and verse to the stones and grasses, marking the geography with a superimposed significance, that they could actually walk the Bible and inhabit its contradictions?
Okay, also 2 Jahre bevor die Insel halt beim Turm ist. Also was mich jetzt... Warte mal, hier kann man hochgehen. Da leuchtet es. War stehen geblieben. Ich habe Angst, dass jetzt der nächste Text kommt, dann wieder unterbrochen wird. Ja. Jetzt soll die Spitze schweigen. Ah, ich weiß. Das war, glaube ich, der Durchblick, wo dann geblinkt hat, ne? Da liegt ein Boot.
Dear Esther, I met Paul. I made my own little pilgrimage. My Damascus, a small semi-detached on the outskirts of Wolverhampton. We drank coffee in his kitchen and tried to connect to one another. Although he knew I hadn't come in search of an apology, reason or retribution, he still spiraled in panic, thrown high and lucid by his own dented bonnet. Responsibility had made him old. Like us, he'd already passed beyond any conceivable boundary of life.
Ups. Hört ihr das auch? Herzklopfen. Gehen wir da rein oder?
I would leave you presents outside your retreat, in this interim space between cliff and beach. I would leave you loaves and fishes, but the fish stocks have been depleted and I've run out of bread. I would row you back to your homeland in a bottomless boat, but I fear we would both be driven mad by the chatter of the sea creatures.
Da wieder nur so eine Formel. Das haben wir ja eben im Leuchtturm gesehen. In Kleidung. Gammelbrot. Das Fisch. Es könnte hier auch irgendeiner dran gewesen sein, der so gespielt hat. Das Monster wäre. Kostenlose Essen bekommen hat. Das ist ja auch weg. Auf jeden Fall war da einer, der hat herumgezeichnet. Jetzt weiter. Aber es ist schön, ne? Das ist schön.
I've become convinced I am not alone here, even though I'm equally sure it is simply a delusion brought upon by circumstance. I do not, for instance, remember where I found the candles, or why I took it upon myself to light such a strange pathway. Perhaps it is only for those who are bound to follow.
Schön. Also wenn ich richtig verstanden habe, denken wir, dass wir nicht alleine sind. Oder der Erzähler, dass er nicht alleine ist.
Dear Esther, I have now driven the stretch of the M5 between Exeter and Bristol over 21 times. But although I have all the reports and all the witnesses, and have cross-referenced them within a millimetre using my ordnance survey maps, I simply cannot find the location. You'd think there would be marks to serve as some evidence. It's somewhere between the turn-off for Sanford and the welcome break services, but although I can always see it in my rear-view mirror, I have as yet been unable to pull ashore.
Hi Putzel, ich hab's jetzt gerade gelesen. Als erstes runter oder hoch? Rechts oder links? Ich gehe mal rechts. Mich interessiert das, was mit dem Boden los ist. alle eigentlich das Land hier, also die Insel verlassen haben. Was ist denn mit den Schiffen hier? Ah, bestimmt, der Leuchtturm war ja aus und da sind die im Land gekracht und haben hier ihr... ganze Fracht verloren. Schon gruselige Geräusche. Naja. Ist halt so, ne? Jetzt hier unten lang? Ne, oben. Ich will noch oben weiter. Was sind wir da oben? Da sind wir gekommen. Gehen wir hin. Folgen wir den Weg.
It's only at night that this place makes any sluggish effort at life. You can see the buoy and the aerial. I've been taking to sleeping through the day in an attempt to resurrect myself. I can feel the last days drawing upon me. There's little point now in continuation. There must be something new to find here. Some nook or some cranny that offers a perspective worth clinging to. I've burnt my bridges. I've sunk my boats and watched them go to water.
Okay, hier geht's nicht weiter. Da unten lang. Ja. Aber wo lang bist du denn? Die Steine. Hey, das habe ich dir nicht erlaubt. Handy. Was soll das denn jetzt? So, gehen jetzt weiter. Ich habe ein kleines Problem mit meinem Handy. Die ganze Zeit den Chat zu. Hier lang, ne? Da ist die Boje. Ich würde so gerne... Kennt ihr das? Ich wollte gerne irgendwo reingehen. Aber ich habe keine Möglichkeit dazu. Sieht bestimmt innen drin interessant aus. Da siehst du dieses marode, runtergekommene. Aber wird interessant sein. Rotum ist es vorher eine Tetanusimpfung oder sowas haben. Also, dann ein zweites Bildchen. Oh, mal. Wieder so eine
There
Höhlenmalerei.
must be a hole in the bottom of the boat. How else could new hermits have arrived?
Da ist der Chat. Da ist der Chat wieder. Da ist der Chat wieder. So. Aber wo lang? Hinten muss es sein. Hoch.
I had kidney stones, and you visited me in the hospital. After the operation, when I was still half submerged in anesthetic, your outline and your speech both blurred. Now my stones have grown into an island and made their escape, and you have been rendered opaque by the car of a drunk.
Was ist da? Aber von hier aus sind wir doch gekommen.
When I first looked into the shaft, I swear I felt the stones in my stomach shift in recognition.
Ein Loch mitten in der Insel. Aufpassen. Muss nicht reinplumpsen. Haus.
I've begun to climb, away from the sea and towards the center. It is a straight line to the summit, where the evening begins to coil around the aerial and squeeze the signals into early silence. The bothy squats against the mount to avoid the gaze of the aerial. I too will creep under the island like an animal and approach it from the northern shore.
Tierstall aus. OP-Besteck. Aber irgendwie teilweise frisch aus. Ne, das Blut, das ist gut. Pillen. Verbände, also wenn das Blut alt, wenn wir es richtig brauen. Mal gucken. Mal kurz einen Blick zurückwerfen.
The bothy was constructed originally in the early 1700s. By then, shepherding had formalized into a career. The first habitual shepherd was a man called Jakobsen, from a lineage of migratory Scandinavians. He was not considered a man of breeding by the mainlanders. He came here every summer whilst building the bothy, hoping eventually that becoming a man of property would secure him a wife and a lineage. Donnelly records that it did not work. He caught some disease from his malcontented goats and died 2 years after completing it. There was no one to carve white lines into the cliff for him either.
Also das ist irgendwie an einer Krankheit gestorben. Scheinbar von Mensch auf Tier. Von Tier auf Mensch übertragen worden ist. Erstmal Güte oder? Woher ins Haus gehen? Ah, wieder so eine Ölmalerei?
When the oil lamps ran out, I didn't pick up a torch, but used the moonlight to read by. When I've pulled the last shreds of sense from it, I will throw Donnelly's book from the cliffs, and perhaps myself with it. Maybe it will wash back up through the caves and erupt from the spring when the rain comes, making its return to the hermit's cave. Perhaps it will be back on the table when I wake. I think I may have thrown it into the sea several times before.
Ost. Was Buch denn? Ich kann ja nichts nehmen. Und der Erzähler das auch. Hier steht ein Koffer. Oh, jetzt öfters schon gesehen? Schon das zweite Mal? Oh. Was ist das? Alter! Danke, Krähe. Vielen Dank. Nicht Krähe, Möwe. Entschuldigung. Möwe. Möwe. Oh, da können wir nach oben gehen. Grabstein. Was war das denn? Grabstein. Oh, ich denke mal, das Spiel will, dass wir hier runterlaufen.
He left his body to the medical school and was duly opened out for a crowd of students 21 days after his passing. The report is included in my edition of his book. The syphilis had torn through his guts like a drunk driver, scrambling his organs like eggs on a plate. But enough definition remained for a cursory examination, and, as I suspected, they found clear evidence of kidney stones. He's likely to have spent the last years of his life in considerable pain. Perhaps this is the root of his laudanum habit. Although its use makes him an unreliable witness, I find myself increasingly drawn into his orbit.
Sterben? Ich weiß nicht. Damals... Ich hatte selber
They
persönlich...
found Jakobsen in early spring. The thaw had only just come. Even though he'd been dead nearly 7 months, his body had been frozen right down to the nerves and had not even begun to decompose. All around him, small flowers were reaching for the weak sun. The goats had adjusted happily to life without a shepherd and were grazing freely about the valley. Donnelly reports they hurled the body in fear and disgust down the shaft, but I cannot corroborate this story.
Der hatte auch schon mal Nierensteine, würde ich sagen, eben. Ja, das tut echt weh. Das Boot. Hm?
Climbing down to the caves, I slipped and fell and have injured my leg. I think the femur is broken. It is clearly infected. The skin has turned a bright, tight pink, and the pain is crashing in on waves, winter tides against my shoreline, drowning out the ache of my stones. I struggled back to the bothy to rest, but it has become clear that there is only one way this is likely to end. The medical supplies I looted from the trawler have suddenly found their purpose. They will keep me lucid for my final ascent.
Kerze.
Donnelly's addiction is my one true constant. Even though I wake in false dawns and find the landscape changing, flowing inconstantly through my tears, I know his reaching is always upon me.
Das kann ruhig machen. Das sind wir Spießbraten. Echt?
They'd stopped the traffic back as far as the Sandford Junction and come up the hard shoulder like radio signals from another star. It took 21 minutes for them to arrive. I watched Paul time it to the second on his watch.
Muss ich ins Wasser springen? Der einzige Weg, ne? Oh no! Boah. Na, jetzt ist es wieder sehr dunkel. Ein Licht am Ende des Tunnels.
In my final dream, I sat at peace with Jakobsen and watched the moon over the Sandford Junction. Goats grazed on the hard shoulder, a world gone to weed and redemption. He showed me his fever scars, and I mine, between each shoulder the nascency of flight.
Die Frage ist nur, wo lang müssen wir denn jetzt gehen? Zeichnung. Weiter. Sehe ich das richtig? Lauter kleine Boote? Lauter kleine Papierboote. So. Ich denke, wir müssen noch über die Brücke nach oben. Bis mal weiter. Oh, ich sehe es schon. Ja, hier geht's auch nicht weiter. Ich will schnell. Rüber. Ja. Wieder so eine Zeichnung. Ja. Nach oben.
This cannot be the shaft they threw the goats into. It cannot be the landfill where the parts of your life that would not burn ended up. It cannot be the chimney that delivered you to the skies. It cannot be the place where you rained back down again to fertilize the soil and make small flowers in the rocks.
Geht's nicht schneller, das ist richtig. Alles voll gekrickelt. Bei Duschen. Oh. Was richtig gemacht? Scheinbar.
wish I could have known Donnelly in this place. We would have had so much to debate. Did he paint these stones or did I? Who left the pots in the hut by the jetty? Who formed the museum under the sea? Who fell silently to his death into the frozen waters? Who erected this godforsaken aerial in the first place? Did this whole island rise to the surface of my stomach, forcing the gulls to take flight? We shall begin to assemble our own version of the North Shore. We will scrawl in dead languages and electrical diagrams and hide them away for future theologians to muse and mumble over. We will send a letter to Esther Donnelly and demand her answer. We will mix the paint with ashes and tarmac and the glow from our infections. We will paint a moon over the Sanford Junction and blue lights falling like stars along the hard shoulder.
Ja, und Totenfülle oder so, ne?
There were chemical diagrams on the posters on the walls on the waiting room. It seemed appropriate at the time. Still life abstractions of the processes which had already begun to break down your nerves and your muscles in the next room. I crammed diazepam as I once crammed for chemistry examinations. I am revising my options for a long and happy life. From here, I can see my armada. I collected all the letters I'd ever meant to send to you, if I'd have ever made it to the mainland, but had instead collected at the bottom of my rucksack, and I spread them out along the lost beach. Then I took each and every one, and I folded them into boats. I folded you into the creases, and then, as the sun was setting, I set the fleet to sail. Shattered into 21 pieces, I consigned you to the Atlantic. and I sat here until I'd watched all of you sink.
Zwei kleine Bötchen. Ah, das sind halt die Briefe, ne? Ich glaube, wir müssen jetzt gleich da hoch. Oder kann ich mir vorstellen. Wo lässt?
I will drag my leg behind me. I will drag it like a crumpled hatchback, tires blown and sparking across the dimming lights of my vision. I'm running out of painkillers and am following the flicker of the moon home. When Paul keeled over dead on the road to Damascus, they restarted his heart with the jump leads from a crumpled hatchback. It took 21 attempts to convince it to wake up. I've begun my voyage in a paper boat without a bottom. I will fly to the moon in it. I've been folded along a crease in time, a weakness in the sheet of life. Now you've settled on the opposite side of the paper to me. I can see your traces in the ink that soaks through the fiber, the pulped vegetation. When we become waterlogged and the cage disintegrates, we will intermingle. When this paper aeroplane leaves the cliff edge and carves parallel vapor trails in the dark, we will come together. If only Donnelly had experienced this, he would have realized he was his own shoreline, as am I. Just as I am becoming this island, so he became his syphilis, retreating into the burning synapses, the stones, the infection. headlights reflected in these retinas. Too long in the tunnels of my island without a bottom. The sea creatures have risen to the surface, but the gulls are not here to carry them back to their nests. I've become fixed, open and staring, an eye turned on itself. I've become an infected leg whose tracking lines form a perfect map of the junctions of the M5. I will take the exit at mid-thigh and plummet to my Esther.
Wow, sieht doch schön aus, ne? Das könnte ich mir als Thumb, also als Thumb oder eher gesagt als Bildschirmschoner gut vorstellen. So. Wunderschön. Was trinken.
I have dredged these waters for the bones of the hermit, for the traces of Donnelly, for any sign of Jakobsen's flock, for the empty bottle that would incriminate him. I have scoured this stretch of motorway 21 times, attempting to recreate his trajectory, the point when his heart stopped dead and all he saw was the moon over the Sanford Junction. He was not drunk, Esther. He was not drunk at all, and it was not his fault. It was the converging lines that doomed him. This is not a recorded natural condition. The gulls do not fly so low over the motorway and cause him to swerve. The paint scored away from his car in lines like an infection, making directly for the heart. we will leave twin vapor trails in the air, white lines etched into these rocks. Dear Esther, I have burnt my belongings, my books, this death certificate. Mine will be written all across this island. Who was Jakobsen? Who remembers him? Donnelly has written of him, but who was Donnelly? Who remembers him? I have painted, carved, hewn, scored into this space all that I could draw from him. There will be another to these shores to remember me. I will rise from the ocean like an island without bottom, come together like a stone, become an aerial, a beacon, that they will not forget you. We have always been drawn here. One day the gulls will return and nest in our bones and our history. I will look to my left and see Esther Donnelly flying beside me. I will look to my right and see Paul Jakobsen flying beside me. They will leave white lines carved into the air to reach the mainland, where help will be sent. Come back.
Ein Abspann. Sagen, wunderschöne Landschaft, wunderschöne Musik. Ich hoffe, es hat euch auch gefallen. Und ich könnte gucken, dass ich noch ein Spiel installiere. Ich weiß nicht, wie lange das braucht. Ist auch ein ruhiger Working Simulator mit, aber da kann man Sachen finden, glaube ich, oder so. Ich weiß es nicht mehr ganz genau. Wäre schön, wenn ihr mir da Tipps und sowas gibt, dann damit wir auch alles finden und freischalten. So, ich lasse es jetzt noch durchlaufen. Da fehlt natürlich leider jetzt die Musik im Hintergrund, ne? Beim Abspann.